Hello everyone, my name is Rhys Kościński. This is Simple Philosophy, where we simplify philosophers to help you better understand life. And in today's episode, we're taking a look at the work of Karl Marx. Now, for the savvier viewers amongst you, you'll realize that this is a re-upload of a video that I've already done, but the difference is I have now harnessed my newfound editing skills to improve the quality of the video and hopefully explain the concepts a lot clearer. In this video, we're going to take a look at Marx's concept of alienation, his concept of ideology, how Marxists understand capitalist society via the base and the superstructure, and finally, we're going to take a look at Althusser's concepts of the repressive state apparatus and the ideological state apparatus, all mixed in with references to Slavoj Zizek, Iron Man 2, and They Live by John Carpenter. If you enjoy the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave me a comment if you have any feedback to give. And without further ado, let's get into it. So one of Marx's key concepts is this concept of alienation, which he talks about in the German ideology. Now, just to recap very briefly from the first video, Marx argues that capitalism is not only an economic system which is fundamentally new to our history or a new development in our history. He also argues that capitalism constructs the social relations that we find ourselves entrapped in. And what he means by this is we are in relations of exploitation, where the proletariat are the working class, the lower rungs of society, who are exploited by the bourgeoisie, who are the ruling class or the upper echelons of society. But not only does capitalism disrupt our social relations in this way, Marx also argues that capitalism fundamentally destroys our human nature. And as a result, he argues that the production of capitalism, the creation of capitalism, has actually undermined or alienated us from our human nature, what it means to be human. Now, for Marx, he believes that the central to human nature is the ability to produce, that we as humans have a desire or a need to produce. And that is essentially the central essence, the species being, as he refers to it in his book, of human nature or of humanity. Now, Marx compares this human nature or human need for production with that of animal production. And he argues that animals do produce things. If we take a bee, for example, we can see that bees produce the most beautiful, wonderful, well-constructed hives that work well for their colony. But he argues that animals only produce or make things to benefit themselves. The only reason the bee makes that hive is to produce honey for itself. Whereas humans, on the other hand, we produce for the community. That at our essence, we are social creatures who want to help each other, who want to work with the community, who want to be in an interconnection of relations. And so as a result, we are therefore workers. We want to work, we want to labor, we want to make things, but we want to make things for the community, for other people, and for the benefit of other people in society. To take this a little bit further, let's take a look at the transition from Taylorism in kind of early capitalism, late feudalism, through to concepts such as the division of labour in capitalism. So under Taylorism, you would be present for 100% of the production process of the thing that you were making. So let's take a shoe, for example. Let's say that you were a shoemaker. You would design the shoe. You would find the fabrics, you would then sample them, you would sew the shoe together, and you would then sell the shoe. And as you walked around the high street in your local village, you would see other people wearing your shoes, and you would feel a sense of pride from this because you made it, you were there from every aspect of the process, and you feel as if you have been rewarded for your efforts and for the work that you've put in. Under capitalism, however, production doesn't work like that. As Adam Smith argues, we have created a new system, or capitalism has created a new system of production called the division of labour. Instead of one person being there for every aspect of making that shoe, instead we have different people working on the different aspects of the shoe's production. We'll have one person designing it, we'll have one person sampling the fabrics, one person making it, and one person selling the shoe at the end of the day. This is called the division of labour, and as a result, Marx argues the division of labour has alienated us from the things that we produce, therefore alienating us against our human nature. So, for example, where I used to feel proud of the shoe that I'd made when I saw other people in the village wearing them and getting use out of them, now the shoe I make I have no connection to, because I've only seen one aspect of its process. And Marx argues that this is one of the fundamental ills of capitalism, that it's also almost made us inhuman in a way. It has alienated us to what it means to be human. And as a result, Marx argues that if the human essence, or if the essence of humanity or human nature is to produce, but we need to create a society where people can produce for socially constructive means, for the social benefit of society. And as a result, he concludes that if you're under a communist system, you could hunt in the morning, you could fish in the afternoon, you could rear cattle in the evening, you could criticize after dinner without actually taking on any of these roles that you have been adopting throughout the day. So therefore, in a communist society, we are not bound to the division of labor, that we would produce things for the social benefit of society. We would still work. He's not saying that we're going to be lazy or anything. He's not an anarchist. He's saying that essentially humans want to produce, but we want to produce things for the social benefit of others. We do not want to be tied 9 to 5 to the factory floor every single day of our lives doing the same repetitive thing, because by doing this, it is alienating us from our humanity. In fact, what people want to do, or what people need to do in order to engage with their human nature, is to produce for society and do different things. So that's essentially what Marx is arguing in his concept of alienation and the solution that he has to that problem. Let's move on to Marx's conception of society here, which he has spread throughout his works. Now, what I need you to imagine is that this image on the slide here is a cake. The bottom of the cake is the base of the cake. It is the sponge of the cake, and the blocks above we're going to pretend are candles. Now, the base of the cake, my sponge of the cake, is made up of the essential features a society needs in order to function, or the essential features capitalist society needs in order to function. First thing that the base of society has are the means of production, because you need the means of production in order to create things. So these are things like raw materials, lands, machine, and tools. As the Labour politician Tony Benn once says, the only real wealth in society are people, land, and the resources that lie under it. And this is a good way to kind of think about the means of production. Similarly, in the sponge of our cake, we have relations of production, which are class domination, one class ruling over another, that this is essential for capitalist society to function. And this makes up the sponge of the cake. This is the majority of the cake, or the base of society that we are looking at. Now, if you told your friends at work, if you told your friends at school that actually when you enter the labour force you are being exploited, chances are you and your friends are not really going to accept that. You're not going to accept the fact that you are being exploited by the capitalist system. So therefore, we need to create another layer of society in order to distract people from the fact that they are being exploited, and that the bourgeoisie own the means of production to produce the tools that we need in society. And this is where the candles come in at the top of the cake. When a cake comes out, the first thing that you will see on your birthday will be the candles shining. And this is what Marx refers to as the superstructure. The superstructure is there to distract us from the base of society. And this can include things like religion. Marx argues during the feudal period, religion was the key factor, or the key aspect, of dominant aspect of the superstructure, which would distract you. However, under capitalist society, whilst we still have religion, we also have other things as well. We have art, or Netflix, or films, movies, TV shows, all of which distract us from the base of society. We then have the law, for example. So law also distracts us from the fact that we are exploited by introducing contracts, working laws, property rights, and these various different things. And then we also have modern politics, and that includes liberalism, social democracy, and conservatism. The idea that if you vote for these groups, or if you get involved with these groups, you could perhaps change something, when in reality, as Marx argues, that is not the case. So just to recap very quickly, we have the base of society, which is the sponge, which is made up of the essentials that a society needs in order to produce things, or for capitalist society in order to produce things, which would be the means of production and the relations of production. And then the superstructure are the different aspects of capitalist society, which distract you. Looking at this cake, there is one thing that we are missing. And the one thing that we are missing is, of course, the icing. Okay, so we have an extra layer to society, an extra layer which covers over the base. So let's imagine this birthday cake comes out. The first thing you see are the candles at the top of this cake, which are the superstructure, and not allowing you to see the base. We also have another layer covering the base, which is the icing of the cake. And this icing of the cake, Marx argues, is ideology. It is the false consciousness which is distracting you or blinding you to the real relations of capitalism and the fact that you as a worker or a working class person are exploited. Now, the ideology reinforces the superstructure. So the ideas of capitalism are reinforced in the Netflix films that you watch, the Netflix series that you watch, the television series, the newspapers, the law, the politics. The ideology informs all of these different aspects. And I always tend to relate this to the moment in Iron Man 2 when Tony Stark stands up and says, I have successfully privatized world peace. Not only is this a kind of neoliberal sentiment that the only way we could achieve world peace is through the privatization of the military might or military means, but it's the idea that it's reinforced in a popular commercial movie. And that is how the ideology functions. So for Marx, ideology isn't a political ideology. By ideology in a political sense, we mean political ideals. For Marx, ideology is more of a psychological construct in a way. So Marx argues that ideology creates this false consciousness. The reason the working class do not revolt, they do not fight against the system, they do not see their relations of production or the fact that they are exploited because they cannot see the base, because they are suffering from a false consciousness, that a false reality is being created by their heads through ideology and through the structure, which is distracting them to the real issues in society. A good film which kind of reinforces this is John Carpenter's They Live, where the main character has a pair of sunglasses. When he puts the sunglasses on, he can see the truth lying under the advertisements and everything else that he sees on his daily walk. When he takes them off, it is then the advertisements that he would normally see. And this is a good idea or a good presentation as to how ideology functions in a Marxist concept. So the superstructure and its ideology blinds workers to their true conditions, the fact that they are exploited. Now, later Marxists have drawn parallels between Marx's theory of alienation and Freud's model of the unconscious. Now, just to go through Freud's model of the unconscious really quickly, Freud argues that the unconscious is like an iceberg. At the peak of the iceberg, the bit that is clearly above the water, we have the conscious mind, and these are things that you can immediately think of that you are aware of thinking, such as I'm bored, I need the toilet, I need to eat something. These form part of your conscious mind. The next level, kind of just below this level, is the pre-conscious mind. So these are things that you know how to do, but you don't really need to think of it consciously in the moment, such as like riding a bike. Everyone knows how to ride a bike, but you don't need to consciously think of it until you actually need to ride a bike, and it then moves into your conscious mind. But the biggest part of the mind, Freud argues, is the unconscious mind. And this is the bit that we cannot see, that we are not aware of, things that are happening in our mind that we do not consciously notice is happening to us. And for Freud, he argues that this unconscious mind manifests itself in dreams, for example. But in a Marxist context, they would argue that ideology is reinforced through the unconscious, that through the TV shows you are watching, as I mentioned, or Iron Man 2, as I've just mentioned, for example, ideology is being reinforced, that these ideas dominate in every aspect of our lives. And whether you notice it or not, the ideology of the state, the ideology of capitalism is constantly being reinforced so that you accept it. And that's quite a radical notion as a result. But from a psychoanalytic point of view for later Marxists, particularly from the Frankfurt School, this is how ideology functions on this basis. Just to move away from Marx to look at another Marxist slightly, just to show how this kind of works in society, we have Louis Althusser, who is a neo-Marxist, or is sometimes referred to as a new Marxist, who's developed this idea of ideology even further. For Althusser, he argues that controlling capitalist society functions in two ways. The first is through the repressive state apparatus. So this is essentially elements of the state where force is used to maintain control. So this is where we can actually see force taking place to maintain the control and law and order of capitalist society. So, for example, if you go round town drunk on a weekend, you will tend to find yourself, after falling into maybe a couple of fights, you are being hurled into the back of a van by the police. Well, Althusser would argue that this is part of the repressive state apparatus. The police are there to physically reprimand you for breaking the laws of capitalism, physically reinstating the ideas of capitalism physically. But the second aspect that Althusser identifies that we are really interested in is the ideological state apparatus. So it's that unconscious process of ideology which is happening within our minds, Marxists would argue. So this is where institutions try to manipulate people's beliefs in order to maintain control. So this is by religion, but it's also in the education system, that the education system is designed to maintain control, to reinforce capitalist ideas so that you grow up thinking that you are living in a fair and free society, when in reality it's probably the opposite that is different, according to Althusser and later Marxists. So for Althusser, he argues that education is one of the main ideological state apparatuses, that it is a tool of the state to pass on capitalist ideology. And we see this happening in the teacher-student relation, where you obey the teacher and you do as you're told, which then mirrors the workplace, that if you go to the workplace, you will do what your boss tells you to do. Another conception would be the fact that when you're at school, you're probably always bored. And that's because you will always be bored whilst you are at work or working in the face of the production process. So therefore, school prepares you for that boredom that you're going to feel for the rest of your life. Similarly, school also dictates what different classes can and cannot do, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. They tell you what to wear, how to look, and humiliate you to this degree. And similarly, it also teaches you that the proletariat are subordinate to the bourgeoisie. And that's why you get nervous every time that you have to go to the headmaster's office if you are in trouble or if you are being told off. So these ideas or these notions are constantly reinforced because they reflect the workplace. You would feel nervous if you ended up having to go for a meeting with the CEO of the board, because you are taught to fear them, essentially. And that fear has grown in school. And this is how control, or the social aspect for Marx and later Marxists, happens in society. But what do you think? Do you think that Marx was correct? Do we think that later Marxists are right? Do we think that ideology functions unconsciously in our mind, telling us what to do, or do we think it is a load of nonsense? Do we think we actually are alienated from our human nature? Do we think that there is such a thing as human nature at all? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time in the next video.